car! You'll pay for this!
Out here, Karen. Respect is earned, not parked across my gate.
The morning the sky burned with gold and the fields shimmered like an ocean of grain should have been one of satisfaction and routine. Yet it carried a tension I couldn't name until I saw the glint of chrome at my farm's entrance. I had been up since dawn, tending irrigation lines and checking the combine harvester, that heavy machine of steel and memories that had been in my family for decades. Its paint dulled by sun and seasons, but its engine still a roar of determination. Farming is a life measured by patience, sweat, and respect for the land, and by now I thought I understood every sound the wind made through the wheat. But the crunch of gravel under unfamiliar tires was not a sound I welcomed. As I rounded the corner of the barn with my coffee steaming in hand, my heart lurched at the sight of a gleaming Bentley, a pearl-white, polished monument to arrogance, sprawled across my farm's only entrance. The driveway was not merely blocked. It was barricaded like a challenge, the sleek car angled deliberately so no tractor, truck, or even a humble pickup could squeeze past. And leaning against the hood, sunglasses flashing and lipstick blazing, stood Karen, my new neighbor, who had been strutting around our rural community as if she owned every acre. Karen had only been living on the edge of our farming town for 3 months. Yet her presence had already stirred unease among the locals. She was not born of this soil, not baptized by dust and drought as we were. She'd arrived in high heels and high hopes of reshaping our quiet world into her polished suburban fantasy. Where we saw community dinners and fairground dances, she saw zoning violations. Where we saw weathered barns holding generations of history, she saw eyesores. She had moved into a sprawling, modern house on a parcel of land carved out of what had once been an orchard, a house so sterile it looked more like a designer's showroom than a home. She spoke of property values and standards, words that rolled off her tongue like commandments. And now, by parking her Bentley like a marble statue across my gate, she had made her boldest move yet. The irony stung. Just last week, she had shown up at the farmers' co-op meeting uninvited, offering unsolicited advice about fencing and landscaping, implying that our weathered trucks and dust-streaked tractors made the community look impoverished to outsiders. Most of us had shrugged it off. People like Karen often floated in like storms and left once they realized the countryside wouldn't bend to their will. But this, physically blocking my livelihood, was no storm to wait out. It was an assault on my independence. I could already feel the consequences clawing at the edges of my mind. A shipment of grain waiting to be transported, the feed truck scheduled for delivery, and the delicate timing of harvest season that left no room for delays. The land does not wait, and neither can a farmer. As I stood there, jaw tight and pulse quickening, a faint cheer of birdsong seemed almost mocking against the tension building in my chest. Karen's Bentley gleamed in the sun, its polished surface mirroring the blue sky, a symbol of her wealth and hubris planted squarely across my freedom. I thought of my father, who had passed the farm to me with a simple lesson. The earth rewards those who respect it, son, but it humbles those who don't. Karen didn't respect the land, the work, or the people. She saw us as props in her curated life. And that Bentley was not just a car, it was her throne. Blocking my kingdom. I walked the fence line, thinking of every other time life had tested me. Droughts that cracked the soil, storms that flattened fields. A broken leg one harvest that had left me hobbling while still driving the combine. I had never backed down before, and I wouldn't start now. But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed patience, strategy, and proof. Her arrogance could not simply be shouted down. It needed to be dismantled piece by piece. I recalled how she had complained to the county last month about my grain silos being unsightly, only to have the inspector confirm they were perfectly within code. That victory had been sweet, but this would need to be something more. Blocking my gate was a move that affected not just me, but the community, deliveries, neighbors using the shortcut through my farm road, even the mail truck. I could feel the eyes of unseen neighbors behind distant curtains, waiting to see if I would bow or rise. I considered calling the sheriff, but I knew small-town politics too well. Karen had money, charm when she chose to wield it, and a way of twisting words to her advantage. A report might end in a polite warning, a delay that would cost me dearly. No, this wasn't a problem for paperwork. It was a problem for resolve. And resolve, I had plenty of. My Harvestor, a hulking monument of gears and grit, stood waiting in the shed like a loyal sentinel. Its blades were sharp, its engine primed. The thought of its raw power sitting idle while Karen's imported toy blocked my gate made something hot and fierce rise in my chest. As the wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh-cut hay, I felt the farm itself watching, waiting for my next move. This wasn't just about a blocked entrance. It was about defending a way of life against someone who thought she could buy control with shiny metal and a smug smile. Karen believed her Bentley, and her bravado made her untouchable. She didn't know yet that out here, we don't bow to bullies. Out here, the land, and those who work it, have a way of reclaiming their space. And as I tightened my grip on my coffee cup, I began to form a plan. One that would remind Karen that no amount of polished chrome could withstand the weight of a farmer's resolve. By midday the sun was high and merciless, pouring light across every acre of wheat like molten brass. Yet the glare from Karen's Bentley still managed to outshine the fields. Its polished curves and spotless paint stood out like an invader against the weathered wood of my barn and the dust-coated trucks parked nearby. I spent the morning pretending to go about my work, checking on irrigation valves and sorting feed sacks, but every task felt like a performance for an uninvited audience. The blocked gate loomed over every thought, a constant reminder that my farm's pulse had been strangled by someone who saw the countryside as her personal stage. The feed delivery driver texted me from the highway, frustrated that he couldn't make it in, and I felt my chest tighten knowing that livestock doesn't wait patiently when its routine is disrupted. Even the mail carrier honked as she passed, slowed by the spectacle at my entrance, shaking her head at the audacity of the blockade. Early afternoon. Word had spread across the small farming community like wildfire through dry stubble. I could see Bob, my nearest neighbor and an old friend of my father's, leaning on his fence line, his expression a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. A couple of other trucks slowed on the county road, their drivers stealing glances at the Bentley and then at me, their eyes asking silently if I'd already caved or if a reckoning was on the horizon. It was in those moments I realized this wasn't only about my farm. It was a public test of the values our town held dear. In communities like ours, reputation and backbone carry more weight than titles or bank accounts. Karen had underestimated not just me, but the very fabric of the place she had chosen to invade. She believed money and arrogance could bend tradition. But what she didn't understand was that those traditions were forged in droughts, floods, and seasons of backbreaking labor. As I returned to the barn, I found myself pacing, the cool shade doing nothing to calm the heat simmering in my veins. My Harvestor sat there like a slumbering beast, its broad header glinting faintly where I had sharpened the blades only days before. I traced a hand over its metal frame, feeling the nicks and scratches that marked decades of service. This machine wasn't just equipment. It was a partner, a testament to every sunrise worked and every storm weathered. My father's fingerprints were embedded in its steering wheel. My own sweat had darkened its seat over the years, and my son, when he was little, had once fallen asleep against its dashboard after a long day of helping me bale hay. This machine represented continuity, grit, and a refusal to surrender. And outside, Karen's Bentley represented the exact opposite: vanity, intrusion, and disrespect. That I took a moment to review the facts. Karen had no right to block the easement that provided access to my land. Our community bylaws and county codes were clear about shared roadways and the prohibition of obstruction. But calling an official or filing a complaint would take time, and time was the one commodity I didn't have. The clouds on the horizon hinted at a storm brewing in a day or two, and the wheat was at its perfect stage for harvest. Any delay could cost me a season's profit. The Bentley's presence wasn't just an annoyance. It was a threat to my livelihood. As the hours ticked by, my anger hardened into resolve. Every sound of the distant highway, every impatient bleat from the goats in the pen, every whisper of dry grass reinforcing the decision forming quietly in my gut. When late afternoon shadows began to stretch across the fields, I climbed the grain silo ladder to clear my head. From the top, the view was endless. Rolling fields, the glimmer of a creek, and in the distance, Karen's mansion-like house squatting where the orchard had once bloomed. Below me, the Bentley gleamed like a silver scar on the earth. The sight stirred memories of every time Karen had looked down on us. From the moment she criticized our handmade farm signs to the day she suggested at a co-op gathering that our weathered equipment lowered the aesthetic of the valley. Each slight had been a pebble in my shoe, tolerable but irritating. Blocking my gait had turned those pebbles into boulders. As I descended, the decision became as solid as the soil beneath my boots. The farm was not just property. It was a heritage entrusted to me by generations who had fought floods and famine without surrender. They had not sacrificed so I could be cowed by a flashy car and a neighbor drunk on her own self-importance. My hand brushed the Harvester's ignition key, and the weight of it felt like history itself resting in my palm. The sun dipped lower, throwing a fiery glow over the fields, and in that light the Harvester seemed almost alive, ready to move, ready to defend what was ours. I knew then that tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, Karen's illusion of control would shatter. There would be no shouting match, no pleading for permission, only action that would remind her and anyone else watching that out here. Respect isn't demanded with money or titles. It's earned in the dirt and dust, and it's defended with steel if necessary. The next morning broke under a veil of mist, the kind that softened the horizon and blurred the line between land and sky. But even that gentle haze couldn't disguise the gleaming insult still wedged across my farm entrance. The Bentley remained where Karen had planted it, its pearl-white paint now faintly kissed by dew, each droplet reflecting a fragment of sunrise like the car was mocking me with its beauty. The roosters crowed and the livestock stirred, but the ordinary rhythms of the farm felt warped by this single intrusion. I moved through chores with mechanical motions, feeding the goats, checking the chicken coop, topping off the fuel in the tractor, all while my thoughts orbited around that blockade like bees circling a hive. The delivery I'd postponed was now overdue. My buyers would expect their grain soon, and the clock of weather was ticking louder by the hour. The distant clouds had grown heavier overnight, promising rain that could flatten my harvest if I didn't act. Word had traveled farther overnight. When I stopped by the local feed store for supplies, whispers hushed as I entered, then rose again when they thought I couldn't hear. A few farmers slapped my shoulder, their eyes twinkling with unspoken encouragement, while others offered subtle nods, the kind men exchange when words would only cheapen the moment. Bob met me outside, leaning on the bed of his pickup, his weathered face creased into a grin that carried both worry and anticipation. Without a single word between us, I knew the entire valley was waiting for my move. Even the store clerk, who rarely showed interest in anything beyond invoices, glanced toward me as if the fate of the community's pride rested on my shoulders. Karen's arrogance had lit a quiet fire in every farmhouse around us. Because her blockade wasn't just against me, it was against the unwritten codes of respect and fairness that kept our small world turning. By mid-morning, I was back at the farm, watching the mist burn away and the sun sharpen into a glaring blade over the fields. My harvester stood in the shed, hulking and steady, its steel panels warming in the light. The machine had weathered droughts, storms, and lean years without complaint. Its rumble was the sound of resilience, and today, it would become a statement louder than any confrontation or legal notice. I thought of my father again, of the stories he'd told me about his own battles. Cattle rustlers run off in the dead of night. Floodwaters held back by sandbags filled in desperation. A neighbor once shamed into returning stolen hay bales after being caught red-handed. The lesson had always been the same. You don't pick fights lightly, but when you do, you finish them decisively. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the fields shimmered with a golden brilliance, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. I ran my hands over the harvester's controls, familiar as a second skin, and felt a calm settle over me. This wasn't reckless anger. It was deliberate action. Karen's blockade had forced my hand, and her smugness had left no room for compromise. I imagined her at her pristine kitchen window, sipping imported coffee, unaware that the ground beneath her confidence was eroding. The farm road was empty except for the Bentley, but I could sense unseen eyes behind distant curtains or from the county road beyond the fence. The community that Karen had underestimated was watching, and though they would never cheer openly, their silence carried a kind of collective approval. I climbed into the harvester's cab, the familiar creak of the seat and the faint smell of diesel wrapping around me like an old friend. The ignition turned, and the machine roared to life, its engine a deep, steady thunder that vibrated through the ground. The birds scattered from the hedgerows, startled by the sudden surge of power, and for a heartbeat, the whole farm seemed to pause. My hands gripped the controls, and I guided the harvester toward the driveway, each inch of its progress an affirmation of years spent refusing to bend. The Bentley came into view through the windshield, a gleaming obstacle poised like a dare across the gravel. My heart was steady now, my decision unshakable. The land had taught me patience, but it had also taught me to act when the time was right. As the harvester rolled forward, the crunch of its tires on gravel was louder than any shout, a sound that carried finality. The breeze picked up, rustling the wheat like applause. The distance closed, the Bentley's polished surface reflecting the looming shadow of my machine. I could almost feel the weight of the community's gaze, each farmer, each family silently invested in the outcome. This wasn't a moment for words or warnings. Those had been spent. This was a moment to remind Karen, and anyone who might try to follow her example, that out here, no luxury car, no imported symbol of wealth could outrank the raw necessity of work and survival. The harvester's engine roared again as I eased it closer, the steel teeth gleaming like a promise. And the Bentley's perfect lines seemed suddenly fragile against the unstoppable weight of a farmer's resolve. The gap between us narrowed to nothing, and the world held its breath as inevitability bore down on arrogance. The final inches vanished beneath the harvester's massive shadow, and the Bentley, once an untouchable jewel of wealth and vanity, now seemed pitifully small. The first screech of metal on metal sliced through the stillness like lightning splitting a tree. The harvester's header kissed the Bentley's rear quarter panel, and the perfect, mirror-smooth paint fractured into spiderwebs of white and gray. A hush seemed to fall over the world, broken only by the low, steady growl of the engine and the distant caw of a crow circling overhead. With a measured push, I pressed forward, not in haste or rage, but with the same deliberate strength I used to till soil or harvest grain. The car's body crumpled like paper under the harvester's steel, its once proud curves twisting into sharp, defeated edges. Chrome trim popped loose, falling into the gravel like discarded jewelry. The sound was ugly, raw, and honest, a sound that belonged to the earth more than the polished lies Karen had brought to our community, beyond the fence line. I sensed movement. Curtains flicking shut, silhouettes frozen, the whole valley silently bearing witness. Bob's truck was parked farther down the road now, angled for a view, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I imagined his expression, a mix of awe, satisfaction, and the quiet understanding of a man who had endured enough of Karen's arrogance. The Bentley's tires deflated under the pressure, the luxury leather seats inside buckling like they were bowing to the inevitable. When the harvester finally rolled past the wreckage, the gate stood open, the driveway clear, and a path to my fields restored. I throttled down the engine, letting the silence flood back in, the air thick with diesel fumes and the faint tang of shattered glass. The storm that had threatened on the horizon began to shift, a distant rumble echoing like applause from the heavens. I parked the harvester beside the barn and stepped out, boots crunching over gravel littered with shards of pearl-white paint. The air smelled of rain and resolve. There was no triumph in the destruction, only the satisfaction of a burden lifted. I thought of the generations before me who had fought to keep this land free from those who would take or misuse it, and I felt their quiet approval in the breeze. The farm, once again unblocked, seemed to breathe easier, the fields stretching out in golden waves, reminding me that the real treasures here weren't imported machines of luxury, but the enduring bond between hard work and the earth. By late afternoon, the story had already begun to ripple through town. At the feed store, they would whisper about the Bentley's ruin with wide-eyed wonder. At the diner, someone would clink a coffee cup and say that respect had been restored. Even the mail carrier would probably tell the tale on her route, each retelling carrying a spark of pride that our community had defended itself without needing courtrooms or county clerks. Karen's influence, once propped up by intimidation and spectacle, began to wither faster than a cut flower. Her calls for outrage would fall on ears tired of her hypocrisy. She had broken the unwritten code, and in doing so, she had forfeited the silent tolerance that had shielded her. As rain finally began to patter against the roof of the barn, I sat on the edge of the docked trailer and watched the droplets darken the gravel. My harvester loomed quietly beside me, its steel sides streaked with mud and the faint scuffs of battle. The weight of what I'd done settled like the rain, steady, cleansing, inevitable. This wasn't about revenge or spectacle. It was about drawing a line in the dirt where arrogance had no place. Karen's Bentley had been a symbol of intrusion, a barricade meant to force submission. Now it was nothing more than twisted metal destined for a tow truck and whispers that would follow her longer than any fine or citation. Over the following days, neighbors I barely knew found excuses to stop by. Some brought fresh bread or pies. Others simply offered a nod or a knowing glance. One elderly farmer, who had never spoken more than a greeting in all the years I'd known him, clasped my shoulder with a hand roughened by decades of labor and left without a word. It was enough. The community was whole again, reminded that its backbone was not for sale. Even Karen's closest acquaintances began to distance themselves. Her invitations to gatherings went unanswered. Her social media posts, once filled with curated perfection, were now met with silence or the occasional subtle jab. Without her Bentley, without her aura of untouchable wealth, she was just another neighbor who had forgotten where she was. Weeks later, under a sky scrubbed clean by autumn winds, I harvested my fields in peace. The wheat fell in golden cascades beneath the harvester's blades, and the land gave back its bounty without interference. From the crest of the hill, I could see Karen's property, her immaculate lawn still trimmed to perfection, but her driveway conspicuously empty, a quiet testament to the price of disrespect. The storm had passed, the air was clear, and the farm thrummed with the steady, timeless rhythm of work. I thought of the lesson my father had taught me. The earth rewards those who respect it and humbles those who don't. Karen had learned that lesson the hard way. And as the harvester rumbled steadily along the rows, I felt the peace I had earned, hard-won, deeply rooted, and entirely unshakable, settle over the land once more.